Now, a little bit about the Center for Cultural Diversity in Aging. We would like to share our vision, and that is that we like all aged care consumers in Australia to experience inclusive and accessible care. Some of our service areas include inclusive practice training and workshops, capacity building to promote cultural inclusion and equity, and which are on our website as multicultural resources, and diversity advice and consulting with government agencies and aged care providers. The Centre of Culture and Diversity in Aging is supported by Winitha and is funded by the Australian Department of Health through the Partners in Cultural Appropriate Care PCAC program.
Now we're going to obviously introduce the two main speakers for today's webinar, who we've got great privilege to be able to have in this space. They are two leaders who have dedicated a lot of their careers to inclusive leadership, the topic we're going to be talking about today. They have contributed widely to a range of different sectors, but have the expert knowledge in some of the ways that we can address this complex topic. First, I'm going to introduce Tasneem Chopra, OAM. Tasneem addresses diversity, intersectionality and leadership across sectors, centering issues of identity, race and gender inequality. This involves board and advisory role responsibilities in the business, arts, education and emergency services. For her efforts, Tasneem was recently appointed the inaugural Ambassador for Women of Colour Australia and named an anti-racism champion by the Australian Human Rights Commission. A TEDx Melbourne presenter and writer, Tasneem has featured in SBS Life, The Guardian, the Sydney Morning Herald, and appeared on the BBC's IQ2 debates, Q&A, and is a regular panellist on The Drum. She's also authored academic papers about diversity and social justice. So we welcome Tasneem to the space. And of course, we also have Winitha, who's also an OAM. Amazing. Winitha is a leading expert in helping organisations build inclusive cultures and Australia's first and foremost thought leader in leadership for people of colour. In 2021, she was awarded an Order of Australia Medal for her extensive work in diversity and inclusion. Winitha has over 22 years' experience in executive roles and has successfully founded several businesses. She has an incredible amount of insight, experiences and expertise to help people of colour advance and support executives, boards, government and businesses. So without further ado, I would like to now offer Tasneem Chopra to start the session. Thank you so much, Tasneem.
Thank you, Lisa. This is an issue of great interest to me. It's about inclusion. It's about diversity. It's about making the vulnerable in our community feel respected and valued. I think all of you from all the various sectors that you're coming from ultimately share the same aspiration, which is how do we lead more inclusively? How do we do this even better? So I am going to proceed with a presentation that is really going to be an overview. It's the 101. It's what is diversity? What is inclusion? What does it mean to be a safe organisation? And how does specifically having leadership that is diverse make the work that you do more inclusive? And that's, I think, it's a very specific sort of leap or, I guess, difference between understanding the concepts, but then what about it? What about diversity? What about inclusion? How then do you practically apply it to the work that you do in order to do it better? So I'll give you the overview of why it's important, what it looks like, and then I believe Winitha will go into details of the how-to, the specifics of, I guess, the roadmap or the pathways to actually achieving that. What I'll be speaking to in this is how can your age sector see the value of including cultural diversity? So how can leadership be more inclusive, specifically by drawing on cultural diversity as an asset in the way that you lead, in the way that you recruit, and just seeing sometimes the talent that you actually have in-house and not necessarily leveraging it because you haven't assessed the value or even perhaps even seen how useful it can be. I'll be providing an in-depth understanding about what D&I is, diversity and inclusion. And I'll look at cultural competence because to me, cultural competence is I guess that's the verb, that's the doing of. What does that look like? And when it works, how does it look? So I'll give some examples of practice of diversity inclusion in the public sector, but also in organisations and in some NGOs, that when it actually works, you can see tangibly, okay, this is making a difference and why. And of course, ultimately, the whole point of this is to make a case for inclusive workplaces. If you're not there yet, why should you be? So the first question we need to ask is, as an organisation, and depending on where you're at in the organisation, if you have any proximity to leadership and in decisions that are being made, who is sitting at that table? And obviously that's a metaphor, but the idea being is when decisions are made for the welfare of the business of the clients, but also the well-being of the employees of that organisation, what does that table look like in terms of who it comprises? Is it a fair representation of Australia or where it is that you're coming from? So we know in Australia, hypothetically, that 1 in 2 of us are either born overseas, 1 in 3 of us are either born overseas or have a parent who's born overseas. It's almost 1 in 2 in Victoria, as an example. So the data sets are there, the diversity is there, it's undeniable. It's more so than a question of knowing that is a statistic that's existing in the ether. How do you respond to it? Do you ignore that? Do you keep it aside? Do you let ethno-specific organisations deal with that because that's not your brief? And if that's your response, then what are you potentially missing out on? What kind of services and quality of care are you ultimately then providing or missing out on providing for your client group as well? So when the leadership or when the makeup of who sits at the table is actually reflective of the state, community, or region that you're serving, the chances of you getting the formula right and getting the mix right when it comes to responding, to understanding, to cultural competence and nuance is actually increased. It's intuitive when you break it down that way, but somehow it does tend to get lost, does tend to get put into the too hard basket, and that happens for a lot of reasons. There's many reasons why leadership in a lot of the healthcare sector, and not just the healthcare sector, but across the public sector and governance generally, tends to exclude often diverse peoples from participation, and that can be from access and opportunity. It can be from the way that we recruit in very traditional ways without actually recognising we don't actually have breadth there. There's the adage in the diversity sector, which is, you can't be what you can't see. And if your leadership traditionally has not been inclusive of diversity, then it goes to follow that most people of diverse backgrounds may not aspire to be in that particular position of diverse leadership or in leadership because they're not seeing themselves reflected. So that's an equation that has, I would say, has been the consistent norm, particularly when it comes to governance in most Australian industries, but is changing because there is acknowledgement that we need to do better, and we can. So when you ask yourself who is missing from that table, the answer to that is often, well, what does our client demographic look like? If you were to do an audit of who's coming through the door, what does your aged care community look like? Is that represented? Is that reflected back into the way that you lead your organisation? That's a very simple metric, but again, a metric that most people aren't doing. And you need to then ask yourself, how do I get to that point? And hopefully Winnie is going to cover that with her session. When we're not consciously inclusive as leaders, we become deliberately excluding. And the danger of that is that you're missing the ability to target with nuance and with precision and with respect, again, communities that are part of your client base. So by rethinking the way that you govern, you then reinvent the way that you deliver. There's a correlation between the two, and it is a mindset shift from the way we've always done things, which is pretty much the 1950s mantra that has dominated so much of leadership in this country. That needs unpacking because Australia doesn't look like it did in 1950, and our incredibly diverse aged care settings are proof of that. So we know that 35% of aged care residents are from culturally diverse backgrounds, and something like 37% of employees are from also cultural backgrounds. So that's there. We've got the community, we've got the employees, but what about the leadership? That seems to be a very strategic and missing rung when it comes to reinventing the way that we do things effectively. Because despite the diversity within those two cohorts of clients and employees, the fact that we don't actually have that same diversity represented at leadership level means we're not getting it right, and we know we're not. And we've only seen evidence of that with report after report. So it really is something that we need to weigh upon ourselves as service providers. In whose interests are we working, and how can we then better fulfill our mandate to them? I've added here that multiculturalism adds depth, breadth, and perspective. So the insights that you get at a table of more diverse cohorts is going to bring insights that may traditionally not have been there. Whether it's someone's expertise, it's their cultural, I call it cultural collateral. You can't download cultural collateral. It actually comes with people. So when you have those people there, the insight they will bring, the nuance they will bring on how to target a community, how to respond to a crisis, how to avert a crisis. That's all gold. And that comes from people. They're your greatest assets. Promoting diversity as an asset is something that I don't shy away from. I think it is one of the most undervalued and underleveraged talents and capacities that organisations have that they've not seen. When you see the success stories in countries like the UK or Canada, where in similar veins, they're really picking up on this and smashing the competitors with such quality, nuanced service, you know that we have the ability to do better. My next point here is drive awareness when seeing your employees. That means, from that I mean, if you're seeing that your employees in your network are coming from CALD and diverse backgrounds, recognize that they're bringing collateral, but they're not leaders. Is that an opportunity for you to think about, well, do we provide pathways for leadership for our employees so that we can then actually govern with more diverse intent? These are things to think about, because if they're there, but you're operating, I guess, on almost separate pages and not actually working together, that's a massive missed opportunity and something to consider. Consider where your employees are coming from, what collateral they're bringing, and if you can somehow extract that by ensuring your leadership is also representative of those views, so you're not missing out. It becomes a great conduit. And when diverse leaders are able to engage with the employees that you have, sometimes in language or the same cultural nuance and background, that can only mean good things for those who are receiving care. There's like no negative in that particular scenario. It's only good that can come of knowing that everyone's on the same cultural page, basically. Overall, be sensitive, be self-aware, and check your privilege. This goes without saying, and I think the fact that you've all signed up to attend this session and improve your skill set and capacity in being inclusive leaders means you're already doing that anyway. So that's almost rhetorical. But again, we can take for granted sometimes when we've been doing things a certain way for the longest time, and then scratch our heads wondering, why aren't we hitting the mark when it comes to reaching effectively to this particular cultural group? What are we doing wrong? Well, that means if you have reached that point, it's about then thinking, who's making decisions for them? What are we basing our responses on? Are we using the playbook that we use for everybody? So square peg, round hole. Maybe that's not going to work. You need to then maybe reassess the way that you're pivoting. So 101, diversity, what does it mean? Inclusion, what does it mean? Again, I know most of you are obviously familiar with these terms, but it does bear repeating because it brings it front and center to why inclusion matters. So diversity I've described as the various expressions people have of their social identity, like age, culture, disability, gender, indigeneity, sexual orientation, and socioeconomic background. That can all present in their professional or community identity as well. So these are the assets. I'm going to call them assets and skills that we have, that we bring to the table, which sometimes are discounted, sometimes causes of discrimination and exclusion, but ultimately are actually assets. Because when we bring this different collateral to a table, we enhance what's there. The way to approach a solution, the life experience that we have, the networks that we bring. It's all gold, and it's about seeing that breadth as something that is to be of benefit to your organisation. Inclusion is the doing of diversity. It's when it's done well. It's the active acceptance of diversity, ensuring that those who are from diverse backgrounds feel seen. They feel valued and respected. They gain access to opportunities and resources, enabling them to contribute to their organizations and communities. So inclusion is the conscious act and art of accepting those identity categories. So that's a really fancy way of saying, we see you, we accept you. Again, sounds simple, sounds intuitive, but it's surprising how often it doesn't happen, and how people from diverse backgrounds do feel excluded. They do miss out on a promotion. They don't find out about that access or pathway to the leadership sort of program that exists for everybody else. They haven't particularly been part of the same networks and communities or groups that tend to privilege each other in elevating one another to promotion. So inclusion, although theoretically sounds very intuitive, is still something we need to work doing better. And part of that comes back to checking our privilege. How do we automatically tend to favour those that we know, those who look like us and those who sound like us, without actually realising that we're not representing everybody? It's a tough one, but it's a call to organisations to do better when they know better. In terms of numbers and stats, the data, people who like data, there's always that typo here. Not 357% of the workforce is called, although wouldn't that be great? It is actually 37%. 37% of our workforce in the aged care sector in this country derive from called backgrounds. They're there. 35% of our clients, which is almost same to same. So it's clearly there. And then again, in theory, it looks like, well, what's the problem? Well, the problem is that if the leadership isn't as diverse, we're not actually fitting things the right way, and we might be mismatching cultural outcomes. We're definitely underperforming in expectations for clients. So how do we get it right? And we get it right by reinventing and re-strategizing with the way that we lead with diverse intent, and that we acknowledge that our diverse leaders actually bring enormous benefit to the way that an organisation plans and the way that engages. There's some data sets here from the Business Review, Harvard Business Review. I've just put them in to demonstrate that when diverse workplaces get it right, they do better. So, yeah, that you might have 1/3 of your workforce that's culturally diverse, but in fact, when your leadership is also diverse, you do even better. So there's a statistic there that diverse organisations are 1.7 times more likely to be innovative leaders in the market. So from that, I glean the more culturally diverse your organisation's executive is, the more likely you are going to be doing better as an aged care service provider in the way that you engage, in the way that you perform, and ultimately, in the way that you run your organisation. So the proof is there, the numbers are there. In terms of making a case for embracing workplace inclusion, again, the Diversity Council of Australia has been great at providing data and statistics on how and why and what this looks like. So when people feel included, when our diverse staff feel like they're seen, like they're heard, like they're valued, we know things are better. They're 5 times more likely to be innovative. They're more likely to work harder. They will be more effective. They're better likely to provide better service. And again, this translates as a concept to the way that we lead. And how do we make that engagement for leaders much more exciting and how much more productive, and overall for the organisation to be a better representation of who they are? When diversity inclusion work, I've just put down some very simple points. Well, diverse leaders will ensure that you meet your employees or your clients where they are at. I talked about them having nuance, bringing cultural collateral to the table, stuff that you can't buy, stuff that you can't necessarily always hire a consultant for. You need people who are there, who get it, who live it, who know it, and who are invested in the outcomes. Diverse leaders will help co-design solutions to your organisation so that moving forward that you're on train and you're also developing something that's culturally sensitive and appropriate to your client group. And ultimately, when people feel valued, they do better. Your clients feel seen, they feel respected. That's only going to be good for business. But again, the bottom line is it's better for the well-being of the aged care community in this country. I put up a stamp there developed by Australia Post during, I think it was the pandemic last year. And I chose this because this was an example of a major institution recognising that diversity in the front line was something that we haven't necessarily respected or acknowledged and celebrated the way that we should. So this stamp came out along with a series of stamp of frontline heroes. And this particular stamp caught my eye because I thought, you don't see this. You don't see an organisation leading with representation of communities that are so important. And I know when this came out, there was a lot of celebratory comments about it, and it came up recently on one of my feeds, and I thought it's a great reminder of how when we get inclusion right, and when we get respect right, it demonstrates how valuable our leadership can be when we see the diverse breadth that they bring and see it as an incredible asset in our community. So that was that particular example. I'm going to end for the last few minutes. I'm just going to skip to a video. This video is a summary, a nice, neat summary that makes the case for why inclusive workplaces matter. And particularly when you consider what diversity in leadership means specifically, why including diverse voices will make all the difference to your organization, from being just a service to a quality experience that is both respectful and progressive.
Hi! In this video, you will learn why diversity in the workforce is important. Diversity is including many different aspects of society, tradition, culture, race, gender, and background experiences into one's organization. It can be considered as a strategy to a better productive growth in the years ahead. Diversity in the workforce is needed for the following 5 reasons. By combining different cultures and experiences, you will have a broad range of understanding of what the consumer needs. This improves your connection with your clients, showing that there are many shared interests between the both of you. By showing your team that your business is a source of acceptance to all differences, makes them feel more trusted, respected, and thus strong friendships will grow among all. By developing their social skills, you motivate them to always give more. Once your business's image has been settled as an open, undiscriminative, and globally accepted firm, a diverse range of employees will be attracted to work in your environment. This opens up your way to different perspectives and opportunities in the future. Equality and diversity in the workforce encourages individual contribution and responsibility, thus giving birth to new ideas, raising your business to a whole new level. By applying diversity strategies, you fill gaps in your business, giving your organization a competitive advantage. This leads to an improvement of your market share and therefore growth of your business. The above 5 reasons will guide you to why smart businesses encourage diversity. As a summary, it can bring better opportunities, innovation, use of skills, and thus excellent performance to your business.
So that's the animated part of today, just being something light and less of me. I hope that you did find some takeaways from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Tasneem. And now over to Winitha for the next presentation.
Hello, my name is Winitha. I'm so glad to be with you at this time. And I'm really excited that you made the time and are putting some energy into doing this work. I think that's half the job is actually showing up. It's kind of what they say in fitness, right? Like half the amount of work that it takes to get fitness, actually getting to the front door and opening the front door. So I just want to acknowledge that and thank you so much for showing up today. Lisa gave a very wonderful introduction to me today, and sometimes reading your own bio is a little bit confronting. But I think the key takeaway there for me personally is that, I guess like Tasneem and Lisa and others on this call today, inclusion has always been at the center of my life. And particularly in recent years, it's been really about working with leaders of organizations to build their capacity and capability individually and organizationally to ensure that there is a culture of inclusion, so that all benefit from that culture and not just a set demographic. And I guess the other area that I'm really, really interested in that excites me a lot is working with people of color directly. And I know Tanvi is on this call today, and Mohammed, who I've had the opportunity to connect with, and Tanvi, I will get back to your LinkedIn message, is working with them to become leaders in organizations. And the other side of it's working with corporate organizations to understand what does it mean to build capacity for people of color in order to become leaders. What are those career pathways and opportunities? And we're going to touch a little bit on that today as well. And I guess at the heart of what I do with organizations is really about system design and delivery. And I know that's one of your standards. And service design and delivery. But I think at the heart of that really is what we call in business systems thinking. And that's a really useful reframe to kind of debunk and start to break down diversity and inclusion and to make it front and center when it comes to looking at how we're going to do this work. Because I think if we just focus on diversity and inclusion, I find that with a lot of individuals and organizations, it keeps them really stuck and stagnant because it's such a really big word. And this kind of like this onus and responsibility of, I've got to change the world. And that can keep people really stuck and stagnant. And I think a lot of you are doing some of that system work and service design delivery work. So I think if you look at it from that context, it will help remove some of those mental blocks and barriers and help you unpack what those pathways might be. So as Tasneem touched on today, the work that I do is really about looking at inclusion and how that can actually help with the talent shortage that we might be experiencing. And I know all of you might be feeling the crunch of that at the moment. Inclusion can help you increase employee retention and engagement. And also what Tasneem touched on today was, diversity at a leadership and at a board level as well. We have the people, our people are passionate, they want those opportunities. And what are we doing internally to provide them? That's really going to help with the talent shortage. That's going to help with the employee retention and engagement as well. So I guess my obsession is really helping leaders integrate inclusion into how they do business. And that's where another helpful reframe will help us unpack what we need to do. So inclusion is never part of your business. It is how you do business. It needs to be integrated into every part, every area of your organization, of your business. And the same thing too is true for leadership. Inclusive leadership is not part of how you lead. It is how you lead. It's not part of your toolkit. It is the toolkit. So I guess for me, the kind of middle point is, get really excited about inclusion, but have a systems approach or framework or way of thinking to help you integrate inclusion into how your business. Because from my experience, clients usually come to me at the other end. They usually come to me when there's a crisis, when something's gone wrong. And particularly in moments where there might be a legal situation in a court of law, they're going to look for a footprint. They're going to look for what have you done? And the onus is going to fall on the leadership team. And there have been many cases, public and non-public, that have demonstrated that if an organization and their leaders haven't been proactive in creating a culture of inclusion and diversity, that reflects on the individual and the organization. And there's a risk in that. There's an impact to the reputation. There's an impact to the organization as well. So it really, really pays to be proactive in this space, to not wait till that moment where you come calling me and say, oh, I need help, because by then it's a little bit too late. So I understand that we're going through a lot at the moment. I understand that, there is a real shortage of staff at the moment. I went to, my grandmother is in an aged care facility. And when I was checking in, the receptionist got a call from a staff member that called in sick. And that kind of made me reflect on this talk, because, every person that is not able to come to work or decides to move to another organization, it really impacts the organization. It impacts the team and it impacts the culture as well. So inclusion really is your ticket to not just keeping your people, but to increase their engagement and to help with that talent shortage and that talent crunch. I can't hone that in enough. And on the other side, I have been a CEO of non-for-profits, and I have worked at an executive level, in state government. So I understand the complexity of delivering on business, meeting standards and compliance, but also being that individual that's perhaps creating a little bit of that overwhelm for you in setting those standards and that compliance and working in that sort of environment. So just know that the information that I'm sharing with you today is coming from a place of love. I know it sounds corny. It's coming from a place of love, and that I do understand what it is like a little bit to be on the other side of the table. So that's the kind of balance that I bring, is that business, understanding the business of business and service delivery, but then also understanding, inclusion and diversity and how it plays out. So I'm just going to share my screen today. Oh, there I am. Hello. And what we're going to do today is understand what keeps us stuck. So in my work with clients or what I like to call partners, what am I seeing time and time again in terms of what is keeping them stuck? Why inclusive leadership is imperative, and Tasneem touched on that before. We need to put a framework around what it is, and that will help you understand what it is not. And then according to research, what are the 6, traits of inclusive leadership? So as you start to build out your inclusive leadership toolkit, what are the tools that you need to have in that toolkit? And then we're going to look at some of the actions that you can take. Now, we've got limited time today. So at the end of this presentation, there will be a set of resources accessible for you. So you can, if you have your phone ready, we're all familiar with QR codes by now, you can take a snapshot or send me an email, and I will send you those resources as well. So that's more of the practical how-tos and things that you can start to put into practice as well. And that's complimentary for you. And if you have any questions, a really good place to find me is on LinkedIn. So I've just put the link there in the chat box. So if you have any other questions ongoing, because we've got limited time today, please do send me a message and I will get back to you, and I will make time to answer your questions. I want to make sure that you're feeling supported. So, we already talked about me. I do like to talk about myself sometimes. So what I tend to see a lot with organizations and leaders is this balance between commitment and implementation. So Tasneem really framed up the business case. And I know that a lot of leaders understand diversity and inclusion, particularly after 2020 and the Black Lives Matter movement. I think, seeing the public outrage and connecting with perhaps, clients or members and friends and colleagues have really helped them understand, why we need to have a deeper commitment to diversity and inclusion. But the real tension is really around, balancing between commitment and implementation. Our people, our clients, our community want to see us walk the talk and not just talk the talk. And that's when we start to see organizations and leaders trip themselves up because they've demonstrated commitment, but they don't have that footprint. They don't have the actions, the plans, the strategies in place that have demonstrated, particularly in a court of law, their commitment to diversity and inclusion. And as employees, as clients, as people part of your community, when we see you implementing, that demonstrates to us your commitment. If we just see you talking to the talk, we're going to disengage really quickly. So just know that there's a balance there between commitment and implementation. And really, it's that gap that we need to fill, right? And I guess for me, that's where I come in when it comes to helping, partners move forward with inclusion. Where I see leaders and organizations get really stuck and stagnant is moving between commitment and implementation. And so the question to ask yourself to help, again, take away some of that overwhelm and frustration, those mental blocks that will stop you from doing the work and moving forward, is to ask yourself, and as a leadership team, as individuals in the organization, how do we close the gap? How do we move from commitment to implementation? And in relation to that, what impact are we wanting to have? And what are those milestones in terms of impact? And also there's a time consideration there too. And I know that we have the inclusive service standards. And, a lot of organizations, for example, in my grandmother's aged care, because, as an inclusion expert, and my eyes and my ears are always up, and I'm always looking for, what are people doing with diversity and inclusion? In the elevator, they have their pledge and their commitment to diversity and inclusion. So we've got the implementation of that pretty much down pat. We know that we need to communicate to demonstrate our commitment. We need to form a strategy in order to demonstrate our commitment. We need to have policies and procedures that align to inclusion, basic inclusion principles. And there are areas in terms of quality and continuous improvement that we can kind of edits that we can make, or little tweaks that we can make to demonstrate our commitment to diversity and inclusion as a leader and as an organization. But where we tend to get stuck is in these two areas, in the last two standards. So service design and delivery and capacity building. So just be mindful that, implementation isn't just about your commitment. We need to be shifting our focus to these two service standards. We need to be shifting our focus to service design and delivery and capacity building. So for example, with service design and delivery, you might map out your systems and your processes. And then as a leadership team, go through them and ask yourself, like Tasneem mentioned in her presentation, whose voice is missing? Whose lived experience is not being represented? And sometimes you're not going to know that if you don't have that lived experience yourself, and if that lived experience isn't in that team as well. And that's why diversity in leadership is so important. And to help break that down, what will be really helpful, I think, is actually breaking these commitments in terms, and to help us to get moving, is to break it down in terms of time. So when it comes to commitment, what I see with a lot of partners is that they think implementation is just about commitment. And that goes on for months and months and months on end until there's a crisis moment. And then everyone's overwhelmed more than being overwhelmed a couple months ago. And my encouragement to you is to keep that commitment short term. So commitment is things such as getting your diversity and inclusion strategy done, making sure that as part of your diversity and inclusion strategy and the formulation of that, people with lived experience have had a seat at that table. They have been part of that process. And co-design is a really good process to use to formulate that strategy. So we need to make sure that people with lived experience, and we can pull people from all areas and levels of the business or organization, but they're part of that process. And importantly, they're part of signing off on that strategy as well, because that's the difference between equity and equality, right? Equity is about opportunity. Equity is about getting to the start of a race. Equity is about getting to the finishing line. It's about having the opportunities to get to that finishing line. So we don't just want them to be part of the process and be consulted. We want them to be at that decision-making table as well. We want them to be part of the group that signs off on that strategy. When it comes to service design and delivery, that really is the medium term. So what are we doing in the next 3 to 6 months? Again, map out your work and put a time frame on it as well. This is what we're going to be doing in the next 3 to 6 months. So that's things such as looking at your processes, looking at feedback that comes from your people, as well as your clients or your wider sort of community. It's things such as doing consultation with stakeholders and groups from different lived experiences as well. Again, whose voice is not in the room, who's missing, and it's about getting that consultation process in place. And we need to look at continuous improvement. So how is that feedback being looped back into continuous improvement processes and processes particularly around quality? So we need to have a plan in place and structured, a bit of a work plan around service design and delivery. And that really is about the next 3 to 6 months. And that is something that is always going to be ongoing. But again, with this work, it really helps to just kind of structure it and silo it to get us going and to start taking action. And then the last one is capacity building, and that really is more of the long-term work. So that's not just things such as inclusive leadership training for our a leadership team, or training for our people and recruitment teams. What tends to get missed out time and time again is providing training and development for people in our organization that have lived experience of discrimination. And that is our people. And we know, as Tasneem mentioned before, that approximately 35% of the workforce are culturally diverse. And there is that disparity between the people at the front line and the people that are making decisions at the middle, at a senior level, and at a board level as well. And I always say with diversity and inclusion that it's not the outcome that's the problem. Whenever I work with partners and they kind of take me through what they've done already, it's not the outcome that's the problem, it's the process. And a lot of the times, the process that we use to achieve those outcomes have the B word, are biased. So it really, really pays to ensure that as organizations, what are we doing about equity and not just equality? Are we just celebrating Harmony Day, International Women's Day, Lunar New Year? Or are we providing some of the more media opportunities, providing leadership programs, career pathways and opportunities, particularly for our culturally diverse people to step into middle management, to step into senior management, to step into executive roles, to get into and to sit at a board level as well? What are we doing? Because that's the difference between equity and equality. So do the inclusive leadership training, run training around helping our people develop inclusive mindsets and behaviors. But I think a real opportunity that is being missed in terms of capacity building, in particular to reach, because a lot of organizations and partners will say, we put out a job ad and we even tapped, culturally diverse people on the shoulder and hardly anyone applied. And my question is, what about the people that are in front of you right now? What have you done to provide pathways and opportunities for them to progress? Because that's what we talk about when we talk about systemic discrimination and bias, right? That's part of the system. So if we don't have those opportunities in place, that tells me there's bias in the organization, because part of getting to the finish line is that opportunity. And we've all seen those diagrams of people sitting on different heights of boxes to peep over a fence or to even look at the race that's happening in front of them. So things such as mentoring programs where members of the executive team can mentor more junior staff. And it doesn't have to be people that are high performance or people that have promise, but people also at the front line. They want to know, in particular, that leadership care about them. They need those opportunities. Equity. Sponsorship programs as well, where individuals can advocate for another person and be always looking for opportunities for them as well. Leadership programs that are designed and delivered by people of color for people of color, and career progression opportunities and pathways as well. So I know at an industry level, we can kind of do that work, but I think at an organizational level, we need to be taking more onus and responsibility around what those career pathways and progression opportunities are and who's benefiting from that. In particular, if 35% of our workforce is culturally diverse, and I think for a lot of organizations, that figure is actually going to be a lot bigger. As Lisa said in the chat box, particularly with some LGAs as well. This is a really good exercise for you to do in your own time as well. The other thing to just be really aware of is a lot of people come to me and say, oh, I'm not biased. And my response to them is, I say patriarchal things all the time. Sometimes I say things that are racist. I am also discriminatory, and I'm the inclusion expert. I don't think I've ever met a perfect person because this world is not perfect. So I think a really good exercise to do to kind of, look at yourself and your own lived experience, because that's informing how you look at the world and how you look at the work business and how you lead, is simply asking yourself the question, who do I go for advice? The other thing that you can do as well is to ask yourself, what am I really proud of? And why is that? Because the chances are is that the things that you're really proud of and the why that's sitting at the heart of that is probably where your bias is going to sit as well. So that's another thing, another exercise that you can do in your own time to help you build your toolkit to be an inclusive leader. And the other thing I'd like you to do, I'm all about homework. I love people giving actions to do because it's all about action. Don't just talk the talk, walk the talk as well. Is to rate yourself out of 10 and then give yourself a result out of 60. So these, in terms of research, these are the 6 key capabilities of inclusive leadership. So again, we've pretty much all got commitment. We understand it. That's why you're here today. That's why you're listening to this recording. But I usually find it's confidence and courage to do this work, the competence and the creative collaboration. So the competence, it's about you taking the time to do this work as well. So that's an exercise for you to do in the meantime. And just to wrap up, I've put together some of my IP to help you guide you and get you kickstarted in this work. As I mentioned, this is an area that I'm really passionate about personally and professionally. I think there's a lot of opportunity here for us to be doing this work in a different way. And these are some things for you to get started. So 3 things on what keeps you stuck. I think the inclusion framework will help you get kickstarted. I also put together a roadmap based on the inclusive service standards, in terms of how you can put them into action and to start to get going and to take action. And then there are some other stuff for you to get you started, because not everyone, having been a CEO for non-for-profit, not everyone has the budget for training and development as well. So that's my gift for you today. And my encouragement is for you to continue moving forward in this work. Having been a CEO of a non-for-profit, I understand if budgets are really, really tight, but there is always something that you can do. So my encouragement is to keep going, to take action, and know that you're not alone. There's about 110 of us on this call today. We're all doing this work together collectively. So thank you very much for hearing me share today, and keep going.
Thank you again to Winitha and Tasneem for their expertise in this very important topic. It's a topic that's not often spoken about in aged care. It needs to be spoken about. One of the recommendations from the Royal Commission's report is that diversity is going to be core business moving forward in the next aged care reform process, in the aged care, improvement of aged care services. Why are we talking about this? Because older people from diverse cultural backgrounds are suffering. Sometimes they're suffering because they're under-consulted, not heard, and silenced. If effective communication, tools aren't adopted, sometimes they simply can't communicate. Now, besides the communication barriers, we have barriers around cultural safety. We had a situation recently where an older person in a residential care facility was not eating. And the reason why she was not eating was because the food, she didn't like it. Now, when we look at food security and food diversity, it's coming from the top down. If people from the leadership perspective, or residential care managers or business managers within that residential care facility are not considering food diversity and the way that we connect with food as a culture, then it's not going to happen. And so we're really passionate about this topic because ultimately it's about the older people. So it's about having a diversity lens in everything that we do as core business. And that's what the Royal Commission has noticed is a gap in the aged care system. But rest assured, you're not alone in this process. It is extremely complex, but it needs to be complex. It needs to be hard. It can't be easy. It can't be easy anymore. You can't just tick a box and say we have a diversity strategy. It needs to be all of us together understanding that people have complex lives and complex traumas. Now, I've been a social worker for a while, and I've worked with complex cases, but I'm not in the aged care sector at the moment. So I understand that we're in a very, very, very difficult time in infection control and in a lot of different things, and in staff shortages. We get that. But this topic should be something that is incorporated in everything we do, including COVID-19 responses, including staff shortage understandings of how to understand people's lives. And look, it's complex, so we get that. I think it's over to Brianna now for where to go for further support.
Our website is the great resource on these topics. So we have developed good practice stories, which is something new that we've done on our website, and it's easily accessible through our homepage. You are welcome also to share your good practice stories from your organization. Call us or email us with your examples and your practice stories, and we are happy to share on social media. We always post on our LinkedIn and Facebook page. We have also other resources on our page, multilingual resources, practice guides, training and development. So feel free to go onto our website to check out all of these resources. In terms of practice guides, we have a lot of topics that we cover. We cover spiritual support, risk management, food and nutrition, languages, interpreters, policies, etc. And they're all free to download from our website. And now we are really happy to present the new resource that we have, which is the promotional poster. That is also free to download from our website, from our About Us page. And feel free to stick that in your office and share with colleagues, and you can get familiar with our work, what to do next, and how to approach us. And now over to Lisa for the consumer voice film introduction.
Thank you so much, Biliana, for that. And I guess in line with the theme of consumer feedback and what Winitha was talking about in relation to co-design and people that have had a lived experience. And we've actually developed this resource called You Can Ask for What You Need from Aged Care Services. It's translated into 16 languages. And it's to encourage older people to give feedback, make a compliment or a complaint to aged care services. And it's been in response to some of our consultations with older people from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds, in that often they feel afraid to make a complaint or to offer feedback to an aged care service. And this was in partnership with Red Hat Films, with support from Elder Rights Advocacy and Australian Multicultural Community Services. So feel free to download that for free from our YouTube channel, but also from our website. So we're really excited about this resource. It does promote discussion around the complexity of feedback and consumer participation. For someone who's just made a comment from Palliative Care Victoria about sending the link, if you go to our website under multilingual resources, consumer voice film, it should be there. And our YouTube channel, which is CCDA-AUS, you'll be able to find it there. Thank you so much for your interest, and let us know if you need support with that. Thank you. As mentioned before, is our Inclusive Service Standards online portal, which you all now have free access to as well. This is around a framework for achieving inclusive organisations. There's 3 measures, 16 performance measures. The portal allows you to measure your progress to inclusion. We are offering 30-minute free mentoring sessions with the platform provider. So please feel free to reach out to us. It's 30 minutes of your time with James, and he'll go through the whole portal with you around how to use the portal for business development and change management. And we're so excited to announce our 2022 webinar series. We've just, completed. We're almost going to be completing our first one, which is a success. We're so happy to have subject matter experts, Tasneem and Winitha, on board. And in line with what Winitha mentioned around bias, we are engaging with an organisation called DivTal around the topic of conscious inclusion, moving on from unconscious bias with Betty Athal, the community leader who's with the Victorian Human Rights Commission. In May, we've also got diversity strategies within the aged care sector. So we're able to engage leaders who are, overseeing diversity strategies. We do have some in the room today, so thank you for coming and for your commitment to this topic. And we have about 4 or 5 community leaders in that space. It's really practical knowledge there. How do they develop a diversity strategy? How are they implementing it? What are some of the challenges? And of course, within the context of aged care policy frameworks. Applying a diversity lens to end-of-life care, which is in line with feedback from providers about that's the topic that they wanted to talk about. What are some of the issues or some of the nuances or ways that we can think around cultural safety around end-of-life care, advanced care planning, palliative care, rituals and the way that people understand death and dying. So it's a very important topic. And the last one is managing equal and mutually beneficial partnerships with multicultural communities. So that's going to be a really interesting one around the fact that we can't do this alone. We need to reach out and develop partnerships and networks with people who are experts in this field, who work every day with diverse communities, and who can perhaps co-design some of the work we do. We're also offering our diversity communities of practice. So we've been able to engage 6 diversity mentors. They're on the right there for you to also reach out to if you need support in your state and territory. And the next one is on the 8th of March, our diversity communities of practice. And that's an opportunity for you to share learnings and to learn from your peers around what's happening in this space, and then to receive diversity coaching and mentoring to support your inclusive practice journey. There'll be breakout rooms, facilitated conversations, and ways that you can network and link in with each other. And our topic for March is going to be primarily focused on language services and the right to communicate. So feel free to also register for free. We are part of the Partners in Culturally Appropriate Care program, where we have a representative in each state and territory. The Centre for Cultural Diversity and Ageing is the Victorian provider. And we also have our website, which is nationally funded. But if you look on our PCAC Alliance website, you'll be able to see a representative in your state and territory. And now I'd like to introduce a project that's just come up from the department, which is called Increasing Access to Translating and Interpreting Services in Aged Care Project. It's in line with the Royal Commission's key recommendations to ensure diversity is core business in aged care. It's in partnership with the ICON agency, and it aims to enhance the ability of senior Australians to access information in a timely fashion in relation to interpreting and translations, and to provide and translate information to allow you to translate anything that you think is relevant in languages other than English and in other accessible formats such as plain English or easy English. And so if you look at that website, the email address at the bottom there, if you have any comments that you'd like to make about translations or interpreting within your organisation, please feel free to reach out to diversityagedcare@iconagency.com.au or reach out to myself or the centre at large if you have any comments about translations or interpreting, because this is what the government is investing in the next 5 years into language services for your care recipients. Just want to thank again Tasneem and Winitha for their time today, and all of you for your participation. When Winitha mentioned about lived experience and representation, I thought about Australian of the Year, Dylan Alcott, who's a big advocate for lived experience, and how passionate he is in saying, if you haven't lived a life where perhaps, you have faced challenges around inclusion, then, it's hard to feel it in your body. So we need representation. We need people to talk to be involved in all aspects of the organisation. Thank you so much again for your participation. Back to Biliana to close off the session.
So thank you, Lisa, and thank you everyone for participating. That was a lovely presentation from both our guest speakers. So just like to say that for more information, you can visit us on our website, which is culturaldiversity.com.au, and you can find us on Facebook and LinkedIn. You can also check out Red Hat Films. It's a special thank you for Sarah Burrell Davis. If any questions, you can always email us through our website. Thank you so much. Bye.